the world lost an angel and true friend, Lynette Diamond Hardaway. She was great.
Former President Donald Trump will preside over the funeral of Diamond Hardaway of the Diamond and Silk conservative duo. Hardaway passed away on January 8th at the age of 51. She had been one of Trump's supporters alongside her sister, Hernita Richardson. The funeral will take place on January 21st in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Please join us on Saturday, January 21st in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She loved that state, and so do I, as we celebrate the life of Diamond.
Diamond and Silk capitulated into the national spotlight during the 2016 presidential campaign and recently backed Trump's 2024 campaign bid in November.
And happy Saturday, and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, January 21st, 2023. We are so happy to have you in with us, and we're happy to have Val Atkinson in with us. Hey, Val.
Hello, Ed. How are you this morning?
You know, Val is very hard to negotiate with. He negotiated off for MLK weekend, so we had to give him time off. He costs a lot of money, so folks need to keep that in mind as you watch the show. We have to pay Val a lot of money to show up. So, Val, thanks for being back in with us. Look, we got a whole bunch to cover, as you saw in the lead into the program. I have on a special T-shirt. I wore this just for you, Val. This is Donald Trump and his infamous holding the Bible upside down outside the Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. And you know the rule here. If we say something about Donald Trump, we got to play a video. And you saw him in the lead-in talking about being in Fayetteville today on the 21st for the funeral of Diamond from the Diamond and Silk duo. Now, I don't want to talk too much about Diamond and Silk necessarily. I don't want to talk too much about Donald Trump, but there is an irony here, Val. It appears that Miss Haradaway died from complications from COVID. Now, they were one of the few people who Fox actually fired because of misinformation about COVID vaccines and that kind of thing. Number one, talk to me about Diamond real quick and what their impact was. Talk to me a little bit about this COVID denying, and then talk a little bit about why Donald Trump still is a part of our lives and we can't get rid of this dude.
Well, first of all, let me say there is a direct connect between Diamond and Herschel Walker and all of that went through where the Republican Party decided to get a guy like Herschel Walker and run him against Raphael Warnock for the U.S. Senate, because they believe in the heart of their hearts that Black people are so stupid that if we see a Black face, we will believe anything that Blackface says about race and race relations. So Diamond and her cohorts and those kinds of things have boring in and got a special place within the right wing. So they can say and do what they please. And people like Donald Trump, your buddy Ed, they love that. They love to hold them up to the Black community. And most importantly, Ed, they love to hold these kind of people up to the white community, the independents and the moderate Republicans, to say, you see, we're not racist. We got Black people that like us. We got Black people that say nice things about us. So that's the relationship here. And I want African Americans to be aware of that so that we can start rejecting that. So the next time they go get a Herschel Walker or Diamond or whomever, they'll think twice about that to say, hey, Black folks ain't going for that no more. Let's move on to something else. And I hope that that is what happens with this and stop playing us for a bunch of fools that we are really not.
Yeah, I asked you a couple other questions about COVID and stuff, but you made me think about something. You know, last week when you were out gallivanting, Sherelle James was in with us for our MLK special. And, we were talking about a number of different things. But one of the things we talked about was Byron Donalds, the representative from Florida who got nominated to be speaker. And one of the things, and in my column last week, I talked about how cynical that was, because right before MLK week, they get up and say, we're nominating him because we believe in the content of your character, Val. That the Republicans don't look at race. That Byron Donalds could be a capable Speaker of the House, just like Hakeem Jeffries. And tell me about Byron Donalds a little bit. What have you picked up anything at all about this dude? I've seen some interviews with him. He talks well, but I mean, he comes from that same camp. I think even though he's more articulate than Diamond and Silk or even Herschel Walker, he still has some liabilities to me.
Well, first of all, I don't think he's worth even vetting through the Black community to determine, because I wouldn't want any of our listeners or anybody in the Black community think that we should vet this guy to see if he is worth our support. He is not. Anytime you allow yourself to be a sycophant in a racial way for somebody who's trying to denigrate and downplay our race, you're not worth our even thinking about you. So this is not about us trying to see if you are worthy of our support and to try to find bad things about you so people won't support you. The best way to do that is ignore you, Donalds. Is ignore you. You're not even worth our consideration. We're not falling for that trap anymore. Often Democrats get to the point where Republicans throw out a bait and we grab it and try to justify and all of these kinds of things, and they're moving on to something else. He's not even worth our consideration, Ed.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I saw him on Joy Reid, and I was actually upset with Joy for inviting him on. I know you want to have good conversations with people, but there was no way it was only be any good viable conversation out of that. The other piece of that, before we move on, because it leads to what you were just talking about, leads to the point I want to get to next about AP history in Florida. The whole COVID thing. People are still dying from COVID, Val.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, I had a very terrible bout with COVID, and I've had every vaccination possible that I can get. And I know that had I not done that, I may have been in serious trouble. I was a sick dude, and not for very long, but I was sick. But I got over it. But I got over it because I had protection. And Diamond was one of those people that was talking about ivermectin and all of those stuff. And I don't know. I mean, a lot of the tributes I've seen coming from the right keep talking about how religious she was and all this other stuff. And I just don't get it, Val. Maybe it's not for us to know, right? maybe there is no answer. For this. And then the last piece of that is Donald Trump is here in Fayetteville this morning as we're recording this. He should be on the ground, and he's going to do the eulogy for Diamond. And Val, we can't get rid of this guy. He's like a cockroach. Do you think, though, that all this other stuff and DeSantis, the guy we get ready to talk about, will they eat into Trump's perpetual front runner status? I mean, is it likely that Trump will be able to maintain his lead over the Republican Party?
I believe personally, Ed, that Trump has been injured. The whole notion of him having some type of veneer or some type of armor around him that couldn't be penetrated by others has been thrown aside. And people within his own party see him as vulnerable. They see him based on what happened in the midterm elections, that just because he asks his base to come out and support candidate X doesn't mean they're going to do that. So they don't think that they are beholden to him. They're not as afraid of him as they once were. So I think that gives a little pathway to people like DeSantis to come in, and maybe some other people, maybe Nikki Haley, maybe some other people that we don't even have on our tongue as yet. But I don't expect, and here I go out making my predictions again, I don't expect Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee for 2024 president. I don't expect that. I don't know who it'll be. I'm not prepared to say who I think it'll be, but I will say I don't think it'll be Donald Trump.
Well, Val, you're pretty good at predictions, so I won't bet against you on that. I'll even put my money on your number, Black 16. Yeah. That Trump won't be the nominee. So it brings us. You mentioned Ron DeSantis, which is where I want to go next. Here's a clip, and then we'll talk about this. Is Karine Jean-Pierre talking about Florida's AP history policy.
Yeah, thank you. What was the White House's reaction to Governor Ron Santos's education department blocking the teaching of AP African American Studies, saying it violates Florida's new state law and, quote, significantly lacks educational value? Does the White House have concerns about this action by the DeSantis administration?
So first of all, I want to be very clear. The administration does not dictate any curriculum for local schools. That is not something that we do here. But there is something that we do want to comment. It is incomprehensible that to see that this is what this ban or this block, to be more specific, that DeSantis has put forward. If you think about the study of Black Americans, that is what he wants to block. And again, these types of actions aren't new. They are not new from what we're seeing, especially from Florida. Sadly, Florida currently bans teachers from talking about who they are and who they love, as we've talked about many times here in this briefing room. They have banned more books in schools and libraries than almost every other state in the country. And let's not forget, they didn't block, be more clear, I want to make sure I'm using the right word here, they didn't block AP European history, they didn't block our
So, Val, Ron DeSantis says there's no intrinsic value of studying African American history at the AP level, and he does not want the state of Florida to offer credit for AP African American history. Now, you're a history guy. You've taught in the academy, at college level, and what is Ron DeSantis afraid of that little white children, Becky and Johnny, are going to learn if they hear the truth about African American history?
Well, in my mind, Ron DeSantis has always been looking for a little nudge that he can move the needle with against Donald Trump. And I think he thinks that he's found this. He wants something that he can go to the base with and say, hey, I'm for this, and I'm your guy for this issue more so than Donald Trump is. I think it's a smart move for DeSantis, because DeSantis knows that the Donald Trump base, the primary core motivator in Donald Trump's base has to do with race and ethnicity. And if he can get to that before Donald can, and say, I'm the guy who's going to push for white privilege, white supremacy. I'm the guy who's going to protect you against CRT and woke and gayness and all of those kinds of things. This is the angle he's going for to get the jump on Donald Trump or anybody else in the Republican Party, so he can separate himself and get the nomination. I think he is doing one heck of a job for that purpose. I disagree with him 100%. Let me say.
Yeah. Let me just make sure that I'm hearing you right.
Yeah, don't misunderstand. I'm saying for what he's trying to do, he's doing a heck of a job, and people ought not take their eye off of that. This is what he's trying to do. Ultimately, he's trying to get to the presidency.
Yeah, let me remind you, you're listening to The Deal. If you're listening on our podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, Anchor, wherever, please subscribe. Have your friends subscribe. That's Val Atkinson, and he clarified his position that DeSantis wasn't doing a great job, but he was doing a great job at being DeSantis, which is trying to become president of the United States. Of course, if you're looking at us, on the website. That's the deal with edclark.com. And we've already been talking about a good deal, mainly about the Republicans and who's the kind of the front runner and how Negroes are kind of involved in that, Val. And I just anticipate that there's going to be more of trying to drag Black people into this to the right. And one of the things that I do want to talk about at some point, not today, because, we got plenty of time to talk about this coming up, but this whole notion of evangelical Black folks who, once they go into white evangelical spaces, they tend to buy hook, line, and sinker the politics. They forget the religious part. They still do the showy part of the religion, right? They go, they get the faith healed, they, do all that other stuff, speak in tongues, whatever, right? However, they buy the politics 100%, and which means that if you have a candidate like Donald Trump who exhibits none of the characteristics of the religion, but if the church says that he's okay, then you have to support that person. And then if you don't, there's something wrong with you. And Val, we're in North Carolina. I know we've got listeners around the world, but we're in North Carolina. And one of the things is our lieutenant governor in North Carolina is a guy who I'm afraid of. I'm really afraid of the Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson, in North Carolina, because he comes from that same bent that because I'm an evangelical and I go to evangelical white spaces, I got to support 100% the Second Amendment. I got to be against abortion rights. I got to continually talk about critical race theory and denigrate anything that has to do with trying to level the playing field for Black folks. I hadn't planned on going there, but I do want to put that on there but in the coming weeks, I do want to bring in some experts to talk about Blacks once they go into these evangelical spaces and how they maneuver around it. Hey, Val, there's one other thing that I want to bring up, and this is completely switching gears, but it's about colored people. And like I said, we're colored people, and I had an opportunity to talk to the head football coach at Elizabeth City State University, which is a HBCU here in North Carolina. And we were talking about naming rights. We were talking about the effect of Deion Sanders on HBCU football and Eddie George and Ed Reed and all those people that are, now putting some spotlight on HBCU football. Let me play a clip. We'll talk about it a little bit and then take a break and then we'll finish talking about it. But this is the head football coach at Elizabeth City State University.
We're fortunate this year to be on television 4 times for football. HBCU, we're on national TV. So that promotes the brand. And now people are seeing that, this is good football. This is a good team. Let me go on the website and look up Elizabeth City State or Virginia State or whatever HBCU. And so social media has been the driver of that. As far as the NILs, those are something that it's a game changer because now you have to compete with other teams. I heard we just had a coaches convention a couple of weeks ago, but now it's kind of like a pay for play.
So Val, Elizabeth City State, small HBCU, but it has a plethora of programs. They actually have an aviation program, Val, where you can learn how to fly a plane or work on a plane. They have all these good things going for it. It's in a good area. It's near Norfolk, Virginia, Tidewater area. You're very familiar with that, which is a booming area. You're a few hours drive from Raleigh. You're a few hours drive from DC. It's a whole bunch of upside of going to school at Elizabeth City State. But the thing that we talked about in that clip was how this whole thing of the transfer portal and NIL, name, image, and likeness, and all that have made college football into really semi-pro. Like we knew it was already, but now it really is. Have you given any thought to the Deion Sanders effect and the Eddie George effect and the Ed Reed effect, and then all these games being on TV and stuff now? Do you anticipate this being a good thing for HBCUs, or is there just a time and a place and time, and then we'll go back to normal?
I think it's going to be a good thing for HBCUs in the long run. What Sanders did, Deion, is to take a little bit of his fame and notoriety and share that with the HBCU side when he was down at Jackson State. And of course, he moved on to Colorado, but he did so much at Jackson State to allow the people to know that, hey, we play good ball over here too. One other thing I want to mention while we got this book open, Ed, is that I believe that HBCUs have a very bright future if they decide to recruit in places that they have not in the past. You mentioned Elizabeth City State University. When I left high school, Elizabeth City was one of the schools that I was considering because I graduated high school in a place called Portsmouth, Virginia, which is right next door to Norfolk. And the other thing, the closest school to me that I could go to was Norfolk State, which was right across the water. And I ended up, I guess I was a homeboy, wanted to stay close to home, ended up going to Norfolk State. But Elizabeth City was still a consideration for me. So I wanted to echo the fact that, yes, they recruit now from places like the Tidewater area of Virginia and northeastern North Carolina. Now, let's fast forward to the future and talk about a guy named Tracy McGrady. When he was playing ball right here in the triangle area of North Carolina in his high school days. And people would come to see the game from all over North Carolina, lines outside of the gym, all black school, all black players on the floor, obviously, and those kinds of things. Almost total white fans in the stands. They will come and see that. The same thing happened to Earl Monroe when he was attending Winston-Salem State University. People would come from all over to watch Earl Monroe play. So college basketball fans, regardless of color, will go to watch great basketball and great football wherever it is, by whomever it's being played. So I think, getting back to your question, Elizabeth City State University has a great opportunity, along with other HBCUs, to really up their market and do well. I think they ought to stay the course and do what's necessary to keep on doing what they do.
Yeah, good points, Val. This is also a good place for us to take a break because I hear some music, so that means we got to take a break. So when we come back, I want to finish up on that, but then I want to swing to the debt ceiling, Val, and talk about Joe Biden's problems with the Republicans on two fronts. Of course, on the debt ceiling and then on some documents that were found at his house. We want to talk about George Santos and the Supreme Court not being able to figure out who made the leak of the documents about the Dobbs decision, and a whole lot more. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
Too many women die every year due to pregnancy-related complications. 2/3 of these deaths are preventable. As healthcare professionals, we play a critical role in making sure women's health concerns are addressed during and after pregnancy. Help your patients understand the warning signs and when they should seek care. Actively listen when she raises concerns. It could save her life. Hear her.
The U.S. reached its $31.4 trillion debt limit on Thursday. The White House and congressional Republicans have yet to agree on a path forward. President Biden says a sit-down with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy needs to happen.
Don't confuse the national debt with debt reduction on a yearly basis. The debt we're paying on, and we're going to have a little discussion about that with the new majority leader of the House, If we don't meet our national debt and renege on the first time, we have a calamity that exceeds anything that's ever happened.
And welcome back to our second segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. If you're watching us, if you're listening to us on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your fine podcasts, we appreciate you doing that. Tell a friend, ask them to subscribe. And as a programming note, I'm on a show called Connections that airs on Sunday in the Triangle. Some guy named Val used to be on there. He quit. He 33 years was too much for him. Lazy, I guess. I mean, 33 years. I mean, come on, you could give at least a year or two more. But on a serious note, I want to thank Val Atkinson for putting me in a position to continue that program. Tomorrow on the program, you'll get the full interview with the head coach of Elizabeth City State University. And we talked about a lot of issues, the value of HBCUs. Even though we were talking about sports, really the segment, Val, is about the value of HBCUs, why they're important, and how sports can just be a gateway to people learning more about those. So if you happen to be in the Triangle area on Foxy 107, 104, or listening online on Radio 1, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., you can catch that interview. And then during the week, the full interview, video interview, will be up on the website if you want to catch that. Sherelle James is in with me to do that interview. Sherelle James is the new host of co-host of Connections. Sherelle happens to be an Elizabeth City State alum. I didn't know that until we got ready to do the thing, so which was kind of cool. So anyway, long story short, Val, we ended up talking about HBCU sports, but again, we talked really about the value of HBCUs. On the lead in, though, there was a clip about the debt ceiling. We reached the debt ceiling on Thursday. It happens frequently, right? We hit the debt ceiling and then they have to raise the debt ceiling. And then now the Republicans are all of a sudden fiscally conservative again. That they're concerned. And every story that I've read, Val, even stories from places like the Wall Street Journal, said the reason why we're at this juncture is because the Republicans' tax cut for the wealthy. That under Donald Trump, the debt and deficit exploded because they're not collecting any money. And then the other part of this is that the Republicans don't want to hire any IRS agents to look at rich people's tax returns. They rather go after me or you or people, you know, who make even less than us because they will take their eyeballs off of rich folks. All right, so debt ceiling. Talk to me about that. What do you know? What do you think is going to happen? Are we going to get to one of those things where they threaten to shut down the government again?
Well, they've already threatened to do that as they normally do. And I think you are absolutely right, Ed, that people need to look at the reasons why we have a debt ceiling in the beginning, how all this works. It's a pattern that's been going on for years. Republicans come in and run up the deficit. And then as soon as Democrats get the reins of power, they come back in again, Republicans, and say, we need to cut spending. We got a big deficit. They don't say who ran the deficit up. But that's where we find ourselves now. And what's going to happen is I was glad to hear President Biden say, we are not negotiating entitlement programs or any other kind of program so that you won't shut the government down. It's non-negotiable. Okay, I've heard Democrats say that before, and I hope it is correct. But I'm also listening to some broadcasts, CNN in particular, who's starting to say, well, there are a couple of things that we could take a look at, and that's where it starts with the media. Then the media jumps on Democrats wanting to know, why can't we meet Republicans halfway? Isn't there something we can give them to keep them from shutting down the government? Show them, give them the hat and show them the door. The thing about it is you can't negotiate these things away. They do it every time. Now is the time says no more. If you want to play this game, and we talked about it before, when we talk about King Solomon and cutting the baby in half and that whole business. We won't go through it here, but Democrats have to stand their ground.
Well, let me tell you where I stand on this. I ain't negotiating shit.
Right.
And that's me playing the role of Biden, right? When McCarthy comes to the White House to talk about this, that's what I would say. I would say there is nothing for us to discuss here. That Kevin McCarthy, you've been given every opportunity, because you really even shouldn't be speaker. You're not in a strong position to tell me anything. Get to getting is what I would say. Now, whether Joe Biden does that or not, because he does have a propensity to try to be this guy who wants to be bipartisan. So I have also heard a lot of stories, Val, about, Joe Biden is the one that saved everything in 2011. The last time we really came to loggerheads on this, because he was able to broker a deal. Talk to me about Joe Biden and his always wanting to be this guy who's in the middle. It's worked to some degree for him, I guess. But on this one, I don't see any good thing happening with trying to be bipartisan on this. Do you?
Well, no, nothing good is going to happen. All you're going to do is to give them reason to keep doing this the next time. That's all you're going to do when you keep doing this. Joe Biden came along in politics, Ed, when there was some modicum of bipartisanship in the Congress with the executive branch. And that day has long passed. And Joe Biden, who is an octogenarian, and I hate to say it, but he's only 10 days older than me. At any rate, he thinks that day's still here. It is not. Things have changed, Joe, and we need to change with it if we want to stay current. Joe Biden only knows backroom politics, where he can get in and come out with that big old smile on his face saying, we got a deal. We only had to give up 2 of our young people and the rights to our next born in order to agree with the Republicans. And we're sick of that. We're tired of that. We don't want a deal. We want what's right for the American people. And it ain't caving in and giving in to the Republicans every time we have a problem.
Yeah, you can't always give away the cow and 3 goats and your daughter, right? That's a lot. That's a lot to ask. And the firstborn. So we'll put a pin in that. I'm hoping that they do stick to their guns and say, Kevin McCarthy, take a hike, and let's see what happens. They have a very slim majority as it is, Val, and one of the ways they have a majority is by the virtue of the fact that they've been able to gerrymander their way into that. And I do want to talk about the Supreme Court real quick before we talk about Joe Biden's documents and some other stuff. There was a leak at the Supreme Court over documents related, or the decision, Dobbs' decision. Let's look at that clip, and then we'll talk about the Supreme Court in general.
The Supreme Court has announced that they still don't know who leaked the draft opinion of the Dobbs versus Jackson decision that ultimately overturned federal abortion rights under Roe v. Wade. The court says an 8-month investigation, including 120 interviews, still didn't reveal who leaked the sensitive documents. 97 employees swore oaths that they didn't leak anything either. Politico published an explosive leak detailing the draft from Justice Samuel Alito in early May.
Okay, Val, so they say they can't figure out who leaked it. My suspicion is that somebody on the right, either Alito or Clarence Thomas or Clarence Thomas's wife, because she got a big mouth, right? But a larger question is about how the Supreme Court's going to do it. And we've talked about it here. There's a case that they have to decide that is related to North Carolina. Again, North Carolina is the center of a lot of stuff. And this whole notion of whether or not the state legislature, the General Assembly, has full control over elections. I'd like for you to talk about that case a little bit, Val, in the Supreme Court in general, about how having this 6-3, majority on the right puts democracy in jeopardy, but it puts a lot of things in jeopardy. And North Carolina's right in the middle of it again.
Well, there's a case pending in the Supreme Court right now. I think they're going to hear it this spring. The case is titled Moore v. Harper. And the essence of that case, Ed, is that the General Assembly wants the authority or the ability to make decisions in the state and not be second-guessed, oversighted, or overruled by anything or anybody. The way things are already set up right now, the governor does not have veto authority over the way the lines are drawn through reapportionment and redistricting. They do, and right now the Supreme Court can rule on whether or not whatever the General Assembly does meets state constitutional muster or not. That's their job, to decide whatever is done is constitutional for the state of North Carolina. Moore v. Harper asked the Supreme Court to rule that the Supreme Court of the state of North Carolina has no say in whatever the General Assembly, the legislature, does. And they've already said that the executive branch, the governor, can't veto it. So it's giving what they call independent state legislature control. They call this whole process ISL. Independent state legislature is what they want, that nobody can come in, nothing can be done to overrule anything that the state legislature does. You're talking about gerrymandering on steroids. You're talking about voter suppression to the nth degree. If you don't already have it now, and the 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court passes Moore v. Harper, Katie, bar the door. We're going to be in for big, big trouble. And I'll tell you something, Ed, it's going to be more than a notion to get rid of it, because they've already put things in place. It's like a chess game where you line everything up, and then when time is right, you make your critical move, and it's checkmate. And they lined everything up, Ed, starting with Citizens United, Shelby v. Holder, which introduced voter suppression. Gerrymandering came in big time because there was no Section 4 in the Voting Rights Act. And then you had a politicization of the Supreme Court, and you went from 5-4 to 6-3. This is trouble. They are lining up all of the pieces, guys, before we move. And this is not about voter turnout. I'm sorry for those people who work in the community really hard, say we got to do this. Yes, please keep trying to get voters out. But I'm here to say that this is not just about voter turnout. Because if all of these things that I just mentioned take hold, then they can suppress the vote.
Right.
You're already the minority. African Americans only make up a little less than 13% of the population.
And shrinking.
You know, I mean, you can't depend upon voter turnout to really knock over the pieces that these guys have already set up.
Well, you know, you mentioned chess, and we're playing checkers.
Right.
On our side, right? Where you don't have to think as much, and it's not as many moves, and it's not no strategery as George Bush used to say. Not a lot of strategery involved. Chess, they have put all the things in place to make it very difficult to undo, and they can be a minority and rule from a minority position, and we've stepped right into it, Val, and I fear, like you said, getting out of that bind is going to be very difficult. You know what? I think this is also another good time to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about another piece to this, is that even though they've managed to cobble together a majority over in the House, at the federal level, it's very tenuous. And there's a couple members of their caucus that are problematic. And we're going to talk about one of them, George Santos. And then we're going to end up talking about Joe Biden and his document troubles and investigations that the House want to do. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
At the time, I just wasn't thinking. I used social media to vent. I wish I would have thought about the effects of scaring people. I didn't mean for that to happen. People took it as a terrorist threat. The university got shut down. I got arrested by the FBI. And now, I don't know what my future looks like. I search my name on the web almost every day and look at the stuff. It's not going away. Think before you post.
George Santos' campaign last year was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication. He deceived the voters of the 3rd Congressional District. He deceived the members of the Nassau County Republican Committee, elected officials, his colleagues, candidates, his opponents, and even some of the media. His lies were not mere fibs. He disgraced the House of Representatives, and in particular, his fabrications went too far. Many groups were hurt. Specifically, I look at those families that were touched by the horrors of the Holocaust and feel for them. He has no place in the Nassau County Republican Committee, nor should he serve in public service, nor as an elected official. He's not welcome here at Republican headquarters.
And welcome back to our third and final segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. We've been talking about a plethora of things. We started out talking about Diamond Hardaway from Diamond and Silk. Donald Trump is in North Carolina today for her funeralization. We talked about AP history in Florida, actually AP African American history, and how Governor DeSantis doesn't want it taught. We talked about HBCU sports. We talked about the debt ceiling, and we talked about the Supreme Court. And Val, coming back in, we saw a clip of the Republican Party in Nassau County, New York, saying they want DeSantis out. They think he's a liability. He shouldn't be part of the party. Now, we know his story. We know his story about his stories, that none of them are true. He wasn't a volleyball player at Baruch College. He's not Jewish. He may even not be gay, but he may be gay. You know, I mean, he's definitely MAGA though. That's the only thing we know for sure. He was on the floor of the House the other day flashing the white power symbol. But I think he's crazy. I mean, I really do. I mean, you got a guy from Brazil who may have, and I just was reading some Brazilian newspapers. They think he may have some African heritage in his family background. He's on the floor of the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., flashing white power signs.
Well, you said he's crazy, Ed. He may not be crazy, but at a minimum, he stopped taking his medicine. I can tell you that without a doubt. I mean, the things he's done are just crazy. And going one point beyond that, the only reason he's still there is that McCarthy needs him for the votes to run the House of Representatives. If this guy were a Democrat, or if he were one of the Republicans that hated McCarthy, he wouldn't be around. And I hope he knows this. But that's how bad we've gotten, politically speaking, Ed, in this country, that we allow minor things that should not come into play to decide how we run our republic. And this has got to stop, because they've already taken out the pillars for our basic democracy. We don't have a thing to stand on. It's problematic. We've got to stop it and go in the other direction.
Yeah, most definitely. But to your larger point about how McCarthy needs this guy. So you lose Santos. Say you lose him. The Democrats will probably win in a special election now, because part of the reason why he won, I think, was because him claiming to be Jewish in that district in Nassau County. You'll see those votes evaporate, right? And then that seat had been a Democratic seat historically, so that flips back Democratic. Then you got there's always seats that people die, people retire, people get sick, all kind of things. And so they're down to 3 or 4 votes. And some of the things that they want to do, Val, is this perpetual investigation thing and put people like Marjorie Taylor Greene in front and people like Matt Gaetz in front. And I think that's a liability for Kevin McCarthy because, we talked extensively about how he was, just trying to get enough people to vote for him to make him Speaker, McCarthy, right? 15 rounds, Val, it took. I mean, the longest since 1820 something, right? So talk to me realistically about how the Republicans are going to do anything because they won't get anything they pass into the Senate to pass. The only thing they didn't pass so far was this one piece of legislation about, I think it was an abortion bill, right? That's dead on arrival in the Senate. So what's their game here then? Is it just to cause havoc for the next 2 years?
Absolutely. You hit it right on the head, hit the nail on the head. They're not trying to pass any legislation that have to do with affecting the lives of everyday Americans. They know they don't have the power to do that. And even if they did, that's not at the top of their agenda. They are trying to do whatever they can to give them, the Republican Party, an advantage in the election of 2024. That's all they're about. And you're talking now how you do that, investigations of not only Joe and Hunter Biden, but investigations of the people who are running the Department of Homeland Security, people at the FBI, people who did the 1-6 investigation. They're going to spend their time investigating everybody, and there'll always be a kernel of news that's dug up by Fox News and maybe CNN that the media can grab hold to and talk about for a few weeks. And then they'll come up with another piece and ask Joe Biden about this and ask somebody else about something else. They'll keep doing that until it's the middle of a red hot election season. So they don't plan on doing anything to act congressional. They don't plan on doing anything to earn their money as a representatives in the 118th Congress. They just want to create havoc, to raise questions, and to position MAGA and the Republican Party to be as effective as they can and win as many seats as they can, many races as they can come 2024.
Yeah, that's precisely it. So that segues into our last major subject, which is the investigation of now documents that were found, classified documents that were found at Joe Biden's home. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it because I think it's saturating TV at this point. But let's look at this clip and then we'll talk about it.
Here's the deal here about those documents. His team has been fully cooperating with the government, but this morning we are learning new details coming to light that the Department of Justice considered sending FBI agents to President Biden's Delaware home to monitor the search for classified documents, but they backed off. The DOJ ultimately decided to let Biden's lawyers carry out their own searches back in November. The administration is now under fire for not disclosing that information sooner, and it's really the reason why House Republicans are now launching 2 separate congressional inquiries into the documents, accusing the administration of waiting months to tell the American people about their discovery.
This is why there's such hypocrisy behind the Bidens. Once again, something big that comes forward prior to an election where they kind of keep it quiet, where the American public could actually have a say in it.
Well, the White House says that's hypocritical and that Republicans showed little interest in investigating classified documents found at former President Trump's estate in Mar-a-Lago. Here's the deal here as it stands.
So, Val, by all appearances, the Bidens are cooperating. They've turned over what they had. Now, Kevin McCarthy says the problem here is that the establishment hid the fact that right before the election that they found these documents. Maybe, maybe not. Who cares? But I remember when this guy named Donald Trump had shit laying all over his floor and unlocked closets and all kind of other stuff that where we knew that people were walking in and out who were spies, Chinese spies and everything else, and people faking their identity to get into Mar-a-Lago. Trump says that wasn't a problem. Kevin McCarthy didn't have any comment on it. Nobody wanted to talk about it then. So is this just hypocrisy as normal, or does Joe Biden have a real problem with these documents?
Hypocrisy as normal. I mean, if you go back just a little bit and turn the page, and we'll ask ourselves the question, how much were we talking about Donald Trump and his handling of classified documents before the issue of Biden and classified documents broached the scene? We were talking about it every day. Now, how much have we talked about Trump and those documents since we've been talking about Biden? Very little, if any. They won. That's what they wanted. They wanted to get the conversation off of Donald Trump and onto Joe Biden. Everybody and their brother now is talking about Joe Biden and his handling of classified documents. As best I understand, we got this guy named Smith who is really looking into the possibility of indictment of Donald Trump for this thing. When's the last time you heard something on the news about Mr. Smith and how close he is and what he's doing? No, because MAGA boys and the right wing have been successful in controlling the narrative about classified documents. And they only want to talk now about classified documents and the president of the United States, the current one, Mr. Joe Biden. So they've won that.
You're right about that. They have been able to switch that subject, and now, you know, if you can get any kind of conversation going on about Donald Trump and his woes, I don't know. I think you're right. They've at least won another minor battle in this war against Joe Biden. We'll put a pin in it there. I want to remind you, you're listening to The Deal or watching The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. We've spent a lot of time talking about a lot of different subjects. Just one other subject before we go to, because I want Val to talk about what he's reading. One of the things that we've always done here is try to encourage people to read and find out the latest books or whatever, Val's reading. But before I go there, Val, I do want to remind you of something, that Duke basketball sucks, and the real battle for the Tobacco Road is today, NC State versus UNC. So for people who live in North Carolina, they'll understand how important it is for Val to learn not to support Duke basketball. So, but on that note, Val, can we then talk about what are you reading right now?
That was a good one, Andy. I can't say anything about that. Duke does suck right now, but we got time to go. I want to hold this up here. The title is White Fear, and it's by Roland Martin. And it's one of the books that I'm reading a second time because it's such an easy read. And I like easy reads because if you have to read as much as Ed and I do, you don't need hard reads, I can tell you that. But he's taking a position, and the subtitle here is How the Browning of America is Making White Folks Lose Their Minds. And that is the key to just about everything that's going on, Ed. Roland really outlines it well in his book. He talks about white folks losing their mind. They can't imagine for a second how things are going to be after 2044 or 2045 or 2042. There are 2 or 3 different dates that people talk about when white people will become the minority in this country. They will no longer be the majority in that date. And they won't be a demographic minority as African Americans are now, but all other people combined can outvote white people. They can't stand that notion. They don't want to come out and say there'll be such thing as white minority rule, because that brings back the days of Rhodesia and South Africa and all of those other kinds of things. But he points out very well in his book, Roland Martin, why we've gotten to this point. And more importantly, Ed, he talks about what should be done about it. And that's what we don't hear enough from writers. We hear about what the problems are. We don't hear enough about solutions. So I recommend Roland Martin's book, White Fear, not only defining the problem, but talking about probable solutions.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Val. And again, we try to get people to think here. I run off at the mouth and talk about stuff all the time, but it's backed up by doing the research. And, you know, there's a tie to what Roland Martin talks about in what we talked about in the first segment when we were talking about how DeSantis doesn't even want us to know about history, African-American history. Because when that time comes, when everything's brown, they want you to think that only white people did things. I mean, I'm not going to candy coat it. You know, they do not want you to believe that black people are capable of very much other than sports, right? And because they tell you when you look at the TV, black people are remarkably successful despite all the things we've been through, right? Because we're the majority of players in the NBA and the NFL, and they make a lot of money. All the music that white kids listen to is, if it's not black people, they're aping black people, right? Most of the culture, the words we say, the dances that we do, all of that stuff is black folks, but that does not equal power. That does not equal political positioning and all that other stuff. White people don't want to give up that aspect of it. Let's just be honest, and you know, that's where we are. So that's a good recommendation, Val. So here's the other thing. We're running up at the end of the show. Tell me something good. Tell me what you're working on. Anything else we need to know?
Yes, I am working on a little article, little op-ed, whatever you want to call it, that I'll be sending in to you, Ed, to you put out there on your blogosphere. We're going to start doing that on at least a bi-monthly basis. And I wanted to piggyback off of what Roland Martin was talking about and get into a little bit more detail about what we can do as individuals to make things go a little better, understanding now what the problem is. So I'll be sending that in soon.
Yeah, be looking forward to that. And like I said, folks, if you haven't subscribed already, just subscribe to the feed, the podcast feed. You'll get all the specials. The special this week is the full interview on connections with Marcus Hilliard, who's the head football coach at Elizabeth City State University, where we talk about not only the HBCU football, but we talk about the value of HBCUs, because I think that's really important. So look out for that. If you want to hear the interview tomorrow morning on Foxy 107, 104, you can do that. But it'll also be on the website. Val's stuff is going to start showing up on the website. All my back pieces for the last 4 years are out there on the website. A lot of stuff that I wrote about 2, 3, 4 years ago, Val, are coming to pass now. I hate to say I was prescient that the rise of this nonsense and we would get to 1-6 and stuff like that, but here we are. And what are we going to do about it, which is your question. What do we do about it? Anyway, so in the meantime, go out, do something good for somebody today. It looks beautiful here in North Carolina. I hope it's beautiful where you are. Again, get people to subscribe. You subscribe, and then we'll see you back here next Saturday for another edition of The Deal. All right, bye.
When you realize this wave just ain't you, gotta rework the mirror angles and change your view. I knew seeing the toughest heads up for the worst. Moving fast, felt the last, bloodthirsty for first. Coincidental, some swear that these streets